And
Yep.
before my camera dropped again, he was talking about how he started to question things after the Iowa caucus and how shady that app was during
Yeah.
the start of the primary.
Yeah, because it had ties to Pete Buttigieg, and then out of nowhere, Buttigieg wins by on the skin of his teeth. Like it just didn't sit right with me.
And for me, back in 2016, I didn't fully question the outcome of the primary enough, but then after I watched the Michael Moore Fahrenheit 11.9, from that point on, I decided I was definitely Bernie or bust in the next go around when he tried to again in 2020.
Makes sense.
And I also wanted to say a common theme of people who move further left, they often talk about how TYT is their first introduction to the left. But for me, it was one of the first voices was Kyle Kulinski. After Bernie dropped out, he was probably one of the first people I started to watch videos on from the left.
I had actually been watching TYT for like 2 years before the Democratic primary even the 2016 Democratic primary even happened.
Yeah, what was odd for me is I didn't even know of TYT then. After I started to discover some of these indie left voices one day, I gave it a chance, and one thing I noticed is it was just a slightly more left version of MSNBC, where the focus was just on everything Trump that day.
Yeah, that's completely fair.
But now that we've gotten a little introduction and background out of the way, let's get into still what's the most important news going on right now, and that's the what's going on in Israel Palestine.
Yeah.
And this first article right here is probably the some of the most recent uh, updates in a timeline form. So I figured we would go to this first. So this CNBC affiliate, the most recent update they've put up is 53 Palestinians and 6 Israelis dead so far from a string of senior Hamas military figures Wednesday with airstrikes and militants in the territory fired rocket barrages. Dozens have died in the worst violence since the 2014 war, with no resolution in sight. The fighting has taken on many hallmarks of that devastating 50-day conflict between Israel and Hamas, with a startling new factor, a burst of Israeli Palestinian citizens in support of those living in the territories, as well as counter-violence by Jewish Israelis. In response, Israel has deployed border guards in 2 mixed Arab Jewish cities that saw unrest in previous days, inciting the burning of a Jewish-owned restaurant and a synagogue, the fatal shooting of an Arab man in attacks on Arab-owned cars. There was a rare use of the parliamentary force, which normally puts down protests by Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And right here is where we've got a photo of some clashes in Jerusalem as they captioned it. And here's a photo of a journalist who got killed along with her husband in their apartment by an Israeli airstrike. then I think that summed up the most recent stuff. But
Yeah,
you pointed out the white phosphorus attack, so I think it was a good idea to take a look at some videos of what happened on this. I won't be playing audio of this yet. It's quite disturbing.
that's an understatement.
And another video. So, Laryece, what are your thoughts of everything that has gone down in the recent developments?
Well, I've always been on the side of Palestine because I understand that this is essentially settler colonialism, and in which the settlers are using are well, at first it was just creating new settlements. Now it is bordering on genocide.
Yes, and you've put those words very well together, and there are so many parallels that you can draw between how the police responded to protests last summer. Then, when you learn that the Israeli gun forces are trained in the same way as U.S. police, and this is a moment where you have to have Palestinian solidarity the same way that you have solidarity with Black Lives Matter here.
Absolutely.
But now we're about to get to a big moment where Andrew Yang made a statement in favor of pro-Israel. So give a few moments for the screen to change. So on Monday night, Andrew Yang came out with this tweet. I'm standing with the people of Israel who are coming under bombardment attacks and condemn the Hamas terrorists. The people of NYC will always stand with our brothers and sisters in Israel who face down terrorism and persevere. So, what was your reaction to Andrew Yang coming out in favor of pro Israel?
I was disgusted to say the least, especially after what we had already known that Israel had taken out at least two different towers by then. And
Yes, it was
then
a.
later, I tweeted out that hashtag Yang supports genocide because that is essentially what he was doing.
Yes, that Yang supports genocide tag. I think I saw the people who were behind starting it, some good comrades, got that off the ground, got it close to top 5 trend. But my first reaction was, I'm not surprised by this. He's. It was just a further confirmation of the unmasking that Andrew Yang has been on for a while in his
Yeah.
mayor campaign for New York City mayor.
Yep. I feel like he's just the logical conclusion of neoliberalism, in which he is a tech bro that is finally trying to accomplish the same things that guys like Reagan and Clinton and Obama started, in which they're trying to cut the social safety net and replace it with things that are not going to feasibly help society.
Yes, I could tell that, yeah, that the whole libertarian and fake populist branding that he was on for a while, that's pretty much dead to me in my eyes. And here are some people that shared who supported his views. First, you've got Stephen Miller, then also Ted Cruz, Meghan McCain, and well-known fascist Ian Miles Chong.
Yep.
And that photo is not loading, but that's the thing you have to keep in mind, that being pro-Israel is a very right-wing position, and these are the type of people who Yang is definitely more similar to, and he wasn't, even if you're being generous, he was only like a center populist at best.
Yeah. Mainly focused on the whole, technological advancement of society rather than actually helping it. Because while his UBI thing is a good idea, when you're using it to replace the social safety net, then you're just running into the same problems. In fact, you're probably running into more problems than you would just with the social safety net.
Yes, that's the one of the big points that of criticisms of the UBI is how it's means tested. You can only choose the safety nets or the UBI, while a left candidate, you would a a left candidate that embraces UBI, like we started to embrace the idea of, we would want the UBI and the social security nets as a
Yeah.
part of their platform. But Yang had a news statement come out earlier this morning about Israel Palestine, and he had deleted that original tweet from Monday night. So I'll read this real quick. I spoke to a group of volunteers for the campaign yesterday, some of whom have been with me for years. Many of them were upset with my recent tweet expressing solidarity with the people of Israel in conjunction with the violence in the region this week that has claimed the lives of innocents and children on both sides. They expressed to me they follow and support me for a number of reasons. One is that I am a clear-headed person who follows facts. The other is I am a human being who stands for universal values of fellowship and goodwill. They felt my tweet was overly simplistic in my treatment of a conflict that has a long and complex history full of tragedies, and they felt it failed to acknowledge the pain and suffering on both sides. They were, of course, correct. I mourn for every Palestinian life taken before its time, as I do for every Israeli. Suffering and pain and violence and death suffered by anyone hurts us all. All people want to be able to live in peace. We all want that for ourselves and our children. Support does not make one blind to the pain and suffering of others. Again, most simply wants to be able to live and pray in peace. And this is what we want as well. I join with millions around the world in praying that the current situation be resolved as quickly as possible and peacefully with minimum suffering. For those who have spoken to me on this behalf, thank you. Continue to believe in humanity. Laryece, what were your thoughts to this updated statement that Andrew Yang put out?
My first thought was he is trying to all lives matter it, which is just unacceptable at the very least. Because you see what the Israel Defense Forces are doing, and you decide to condemn the Palestinian children with rocks. Like, I don't understand like what is wrong with these people that they cannot see how this is such an incomparable comparison.
Yes, and one thing I wanted to point out is I don't get the logic of, if you're Israeli, why you would have to be pro Israel. It's just like you can come out against the actions of your country that you feel are wrong, and that's something that we've had to do a lot here on the left.
Absolutely. Like, Americans do it all the time. The French especially do it all the time. I don't see why Israelis can't, other than the fact that their government borders on fascism at some points.
Oh wow, my camera is spazzing out, but I think I'm gonna move to another going on Andrew Yang some more. Oh. Oh, there we go. I think I'm back. But one of the best threads on Twitter tearing down Andrew Yang comes from Zai Squirrel. So I'm about to present a video that shows how much that proves how he's a fraud, and it comes from the Jimmy Dore show when he made an appearance on there. And I get that even if you're kind of a fan of Jimmy Dore, that his shtick can wear on you quickly. But let's get to that video. Never mind, I don't think that's going to work.
All right.
But the main point of that video was Andrew Yang was about to use the right-wing talking points to come out against increasing the minimum wage. And the reason why it was one of the better highlights of what Jimmy Dore has done is because he came out and completely debunked the right-wing talking points about why he wouldn't be for increasing the minimum wage.
Well, that's good of him.
And that thread also, he pretty much admits to Dave Bruven, another, a lefty, someone who used to be left but took a big shift right, about how he was going to destroy social programs. But I think we've done enough to tear down Andrew Yang for now, especially as yesterday, when his response yesterday was to try to deflect and focus on his plan to get everyone back in school 5 days a week. But before we move on to more people reviewing themselves on Israel Palestine, how do you think getting children back to school 5 days a week in the fall will go?
As of right now, not well. I need to see more people being vaccinated, which has been slowing down recently. I need to see these schools not have not kick teachers and students out if they have been vaccinated, which happened in a Florida school a couple weeks ago. And I need to see these vaccine conspiracies that are happening on the right disappear, because these people refuse to get vaccines because of these conspiracy theories.
Yes, I think even if you get the majority of people vaccinated, those vaccines are going to end early into the new school year, so that's going to be another big issue as well. And there's still plenty of reasons to be skeptical of how this vaccine will go. Even though I'm still getting it, I still have plenty of skepticisms about it as well. But another person that revealed themselves in a big way on this Israel-Palestine issue is the climate activist Greta Thunberg. So let's get her tweet up on the screen. To be clear, I'm not against Israel or Palestine. Needless to say, I'm against any form of violence or oppression from anyone or any part. And again, it is devastating to follow the developments in Israel and Palestine. So how do you react seeing that tweet come out from her yesterday?
My first thoughts were she was an eco-fascist. My second thoughts were I saw this joke where it's basically like, I can excuse genocide, but I draw the line at global warming, which is essentially what she is doing. Um, like, you can't both sides something when one side is committing atrocities to the point where 43% of the victims are either women or children. Like, you can't both sides this.
Yes, I agree as well. And her big mission is supposed to be climate change. And do you not realize how destructive imperialism is on the environment?
Absolutely.
And if you're in her form of climate change, how's that any different from the type of rhetoric that Joe Biden has on climate change?
It really isn't. And honestly, neither is the Green New Deal. Because the Green New Deal, while it will by far make things better in uh, developed countries like the U.S., UK, Australia, places like that, it will not do. It will just be horrendous for countries in the global south and quote unquote third world countries, because they will take these resources from them, and these are already countries that have been losing resources in mass amounts. They'll take those resources to try and transport them here, um, to save ourselves. That's pretty much the same problem I have with social democracy.
Oh, yes, you brought up a good point about criticizing the Green New Deal from the left. You have to realize that the Green New Deal that was presented into Congress after we added the squad a couple years ago is a watered down version of what the Green Party had originally uh, written in their version of the bill.
Yeah.
And that AOC's fans do not want to hear anything about criticisms from the left on that Green New Deal.
Nope.
As another thing I want to say on Greta is there's been right wingers who have had a real weird reception with trying to come out and attack her for everything, but I've mainly let it go up to this point. But this is a major learning point issue for her if she's really serious about the climate change activism that she's about.
Well, the main difference between people on the so-called left and people on the right is that people on the right do not tackle things from a scientific or a logical standpoint. They always attack things from a feeling standpoint or a business standpoint instead of, because, oh, they'll take away our jobs, which has been proven to be wrong. And in fact, even the Green New Deal will help things, but that's another story. Whereas people on the left will actually analyze where the problem is in someone's thinking and try to explain why it's either ineffective or does the same thing but transports the exploitation to another part of the world.
Yes, I think you've brought up a good point of, I think this can apply to how you respond to anyone to your left. It's not just the right wingers. Liberals can do this to progressives. Progressives can do this to socialists. Socialists could even have that type of response to communists. It's not that type of emotional response is not just exclusive to right wingers responding to anything that's to the left of them.
Absolutely.
And and this morning we had another big revelation on this. Celebrity Gal Gadot revealing herself and where she stands on the whole Israel-Palestine. My heart breaks. My country is at war. I worry for my family, my friends. I worry for my people. This is a vicious cycle that has been going on for far too long. Israel deserves to live as a free and safe nation. Our neighbors deserve the same. I pray for the victims and their families. I pray for this unimaginable hostility to end. I pray for our leaders to find the solution so we could live side by side in peace. I pray for better days. So, what does this say about Gal Gadot coming out with that statement earlier this morning?
Well, I'm not surprised because she has a history of saying these exact things, and she actually was a member of the IDF. So I'm not surprised. I'm not even disappointed because this is just something to be expected from her.
Yes, this goes back to the whole point I made earlier. Just because you're Israel doesn't mean you have to be pro-Israel when they're wrong.
Yeah. And the same thing can apply to Denny Avdia too.
Yes, good point there. And one of the last things I wanted to go to on Israel Palestine is yesterday Twitter censored a writer's account by accident. So let's
By
get into
accident.
the story on that real quick. Twitter said it restricted Palestinian writer's account by accident. The impacted account belongs to Miriam Barghouti, who was on the ground reporting on protests against the expulsion of Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem. On Tuesday, Twitter temporarily restricted the account of Palestinian American writer Miriam Barghouti, who was on the ground in the West Bank reporting on protests against the expulsion of Palestinians from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem. We took enforcement action on the account you referenced an error. That has since been reversed, a Twitter spokesperson told Motherboard in an email. During the account restriction, Barghouti's bio, and several of her recent tweets were replaced with a message at Miriam Barghoudi's account is temporarily unavailable because it violates the Twitter media policy. And let's go down to her response. This was the tweet that she said just before that restriction came. I feel like I'm in a war zone in Beit El. And the last, pretty much it said Twitter wouldn't respond to what had happened to her account yesterday. So to sum up, it's not surprising that big tech has been censoring the events that have happened that have been going on with Israel and Palestine.
Yep.
And Twitter may not even be the worst offender. Facebook has and Instagram have been far more aggressive.
Instagram has been terrible with it.
Yes, they've been the worst offender of this censorship of this story that we've had going on in Israel and Palestine. But if any further developments come of this, be sure to talk about this Friday on the Rochford Files. But it's time to go on to a sports story, since one of the things about my show is I will cover sports whenever they intersect with politics. So this one happened last week, where the IOC athletes were banned from wearing Black Lives Matter apparel and protest messages at the Tokyo Olympics. So let's get that article up on the screen. The International Olympic Committee has ruled that athletes will not be permitted to wear any apparel with political messaging during the Tokyo Olympics. The IOC revealed 2 weeks ago it will consider punishing any athletes involved in protest or demonstrations during the ceremonies or on the podium, specifically forbidding it. This week, the IOC said any items of clothing featuring slogans like Black Lives Matter will not be allowed. Despite the move, apparel featuring the words peace, respect, solidarity, inclusion, and equality are permitted. In citing reasons for the decision, the IOC said 70% of 3,500 athletes surveyed last year agreed it wasn't appropriate to demonstrate or express their views while participating in the Olympics or attending the opening and closing ceremonies. There is no such restriction on apparel worn during any press conferences, interviews, or team meetings, however. A very clear majority of athletes said they think it's not appropriate to demonstrate or express their views on the field of play, at the official ceremonies, or at the podium, said Kirsty Coventry, the IOC's commission chief. So our recommendation is to preserve the podium, field of play, and official ceremonies from any kind of protest or demonstrations or acts perceived as such. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who represented the families of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, criticized the decision in a tweet. The Olympics will now ban any athlete who wears a BLM shirt, kneels during the anthem, or raises a fist to oppose racism. The wrong message about basic human rights, and I urge the Olympic Committee to reverse this decision. And here's a tweet on screen real quick. So, Laryece, what were your thoughts when this story came out last week?
Well, I was insulted because it's basically saying that my life matters is a political statement, and the fact that 70 and saying that 77% of the people polled think that it's not a big idea to ban it, kind of is telling on themselves that they do not support the movement at all, and that they have some either hidden biases against black people, or they um, are open about it, or they just do not know. In either way, it's not acceptable.
Yes, I agree, and I think it just shows to show you that there's a lot more right-wing conservative countries than you think when this is the type of response you get with 70% of athletes surveyed coming out in a response like that, because Black Lives Matter is not isn't supposed to be a political issue. It's supposed to be a fight
A
for
human rights
basic
issue.
human rights. And I wonder, do you think there will be any type of fallout coming in the future weeks in
Well,
counter response?
I would hope that any black athletes intending on participating, either A, uh, protest it, or B, just wear it anyway. And ban if they ban them or suspend them from the Olympics, then it shows where the Olympics' allegiances are.
Yes, I agree. I think there's a couple of sports groups that you would expect to make a strong statement against this, whether they're there or by boycotting, and that's the men and women's USA basketball team. That's the definite group that I would expect a strong statement against this from.
Along with potentially the women's soccer team.
Yes, those are the main three that, even though I imagine a lot of NBA players, or you may not even have a single NBA player in the Olympics with the way this season has gone, but I would hope whoever does join who's involved in the Olympics does make some type of strong statement against the IOC.
Yeah.
So when you saw that they're only going to allow like general ambiguous statements to be worn during the Olympics, what are your thoughts on that part?
Well, it shows that they're bought by corporations that do not care about human rights and want to be all inclusive, which basically means that someone on the far right can insult someone who is a minority or LGBTQ or a woman, and they can't get any blowback from it because that'll be too political.
Yes, what I felt was it was a even further watering down compared to the messages that the NBA allowed on players to wear on the back of their uniform during
Absolutely.
the NBA bubble.
Yep.
The fact that they wouldn't allow players to wear names of black people that did get killed by police, even if they got permission from their families. More aggressive political statements compared to the ones that they did allow.
Hmm. And then the whole boycott that lasted all of one day.
Yes, now that you brought up the boycott, what are your thoughts about how Barack Obama came in and convinced the players to play again?
I wasn't surprised. Um, Obama, while he may be a black person, he has been bought by the system to say the least. He is the stereotypical made it out and became everything that he fought against.
Yes, so my thoughts on this were when you heard about the very tiny concessions that NBA players got from this, it was just the majority of their arenas could be used as polling locations during the election. Even if that became a permanent thing, that still wasn't a good enough concession in my eyes to get the strike to stop.
Yeah,
And I wanted to bring up another point about how I think it's a role player versus superstar player dynamic. Because I imagine more role players would have been more supportive to keeping the strike ongoing further. But I also understand how much more complicated it was due to being in the bubble and how much longer it would take at the time to get players cleared to resume.
yeah.
Because the two main players that were considered to be convinced by Barack Obama to end the strike were Chris Paul and LeBron James.
Yep.
So I hope then you got a lot of other sports leagues that I felt treated the strike like take a day off type of challenge rather than a real genuine moment to show solidarity with what could have
Yep.
been a huge rollover moment.
It could have shown that the players, especially the workers, are not going to stick up for a corporation's profits in the face of injustice.
Good point right there, but we have to move on to one of the well most well-known liberal celebrities who is one of the biggest sheep herders to the Democratic Party. That would be Chrissy Teigen.
Mm-hmm.
So yesterday it came out that she was revealed to have bullied someone.
I didn't know that one.
So yes, we'll get into the story.
Mm-hmm.
Courtney Stodden claims Chrissy Teigen DM'd her telling her to kill herself. Courtney Stodden said Chrissy Teigen did more than just publicly tweet mean things to them. Courtney claims Chrissy told them to kill myself, and Courtney almost did. Courtney, who identifies as non-binary, claims Chrissy all but salivated at the thought of Courtney dying, and they claim to have private DMs saying as much. They told the Daily Beast that Chrissy would privately DM me and tell me to kill myself. Courtney further claims things like, I can't wait for you to die. Courtney says the cruelty back then, roughly 10 years ago, didn't just come from Chrissy. For example, they say Joy Behar had a field day with calling me a slut. Courtney Love told me I was a whore. People came out of the woodwork to beat up on a kid because she was in a situation she shouldn't have been. And here's a photo of some tweets at Courtney Stodden. There's a reply to her saying that she hates Courtney. This one up here, my Friday fantasy, you dirt nap, baby. And another one telling her to go to sleep forever. This one of her calling her an idiot. And wondering if she even had a family. So how did you feel hearing about everything that came out from that article?
Well, the very least I can say is she's certainly a hypocrite, because she can't do all that and then act like a saint and pretend she got bullied off the website because people were sick of hearing her talk about her $3,000 dinners.
Yes, and the point of why I wanted to bring this up is people think that when you try to shame people into voting the Democratic Party that it's being done with good intentions, but it's just a lower level form of bullying that we see come around every election cycle. And when they don't call out that type of bullying, they're going to take it to other levels, like like Chrissy Teigen just did right there.
Like, I don't care if you urge your friends to vote Democrat, because as of right now, the opposition is a fascist party, so you really do not have much of a choice. However, to take it to that level is absolutely horrifying, and it is very indicative of what American liberalism is all about.
Yes, I think there is a big difference between just like lobbying, but being respectful of people who decide to vote third party, not vote at all, or just stick to down ballot. But then Chrissy Teigen is also one of the big faces of the brunch liberals, so it's important that people know that there's a bad side to her as well.
Yeah.
So this next story we're going to get into came out yesterday that the Oakland Athletics are now going to consider relocation. The Oakland Athletics on Tuesday said they will start exploring the possibility of relocating with the support of Major League Baseball, a move that could put pressure on local government officials to greenlight a new stadium project that has spent years in limbo. The A's, who have played in Oakland since 1968, have prioritized building a waterfront stadium in downtown Oakland at the Howard Terminal site. But after years of failed stadium plans, and weeks after the organization requested that the city council vote on the $12 billion mixed-use development before its late July summer recess, the long-anticipated specter of the A's looking into the relocation became a reality on Tuesday. The future success of the A's depends on a new ballpark, owner John Fisher said in a statement. Oakland is a great baseball town, and we will continue to pursue our waterfront ballpark project. We also follow MLB's direction to explore other markets. The A's are the lone remaining team in Oakland after the Warriors moved to San Francisco and the Raiders left for Las Vegas. The pursuit of a new stadium to replace the 55-year-old Ring Central Coliseum has included multiple sites in Oakland, dalliances with Fremont and San Jose, 2 decades out of groundbreaking. The Howard Terminal project, in which the A's have proposed funding a $1 billion stadium, spending more on a development that would include 3,000 units of affordable housing, office and retail space, and a hotel, is the latest effort and has been seen as the likeliest to succeed. We're hopeful that our exciting plan for a waterfront park that's been privately financed will be taken up by the City Council, A's President Dave Kaval told the AP on Tuesday. I think it's something that is kind of a generational opportunity to reimagine the waterfront. We're going to continue to pursue that, and we're still hopeful that could get approved, but we have to be realistic about where we are with the timelines. The goal had been to open in 2023, but even if approved by City Council this summer, it would not be ready until 2027. So that I think that sums up the article well. Before we address Oakland directly, what are your thoughts on public versus private stadium financing?
Well, I am actually completely against the city, taxpayer money going toward a stadium if the city does not own it, unlike with the Chicago Bears. But in the case of Oakland or Spanos and San Diego or the Raiders or any of that, it's clearly motivated out of not wanting to pay for their own stadium.
Well, I'm going to say old liberal me wouldn't have cared much, just as long as my team stood around. And I'll respect it more if more of your funding is private funding. But now I'm to the point, if you use public funding, you must repay the people over time for using that to build a stadium.
Another example would have been the Charlotte Hornets back in 2002 with George Shinn, when he either demanded that they fund replace the Charlotte Coliseum, or he moved, which he did, and went to New Orleans.
So even though John Oliver is a liberal, he does do a good job of covering things that the rest of mainstream media doesn't from time to time. So I would recommend watching his Last Week Tonight on stadium financing. It's a very good episode, and you get to learn how one of the cities who got screwed over the worst over a new stadium was the people of Cincinnati when Paul Brown Stadium got built.
Yep.
They've been on the hook. They're going to be on the hook for that still for years.
Yep.
So on a surface level, normally these stadium issues, they don't feel political, but it's a very big political issue, especially when you run into the difficulties that the Oakland Athletics have for a long time trying to find a new stadium.
And considering how they haven't been the most quality baseball team recently, and their owner has a history of not paying minor league players, that was just exposed last year. They really just, the owner does not have much of a leg to stand on when it comes to demanding that the city pay for his new stadium.
Yes, we know that Oakland is the Moneyball organization, and they've run into complications because politicians can be the local city council. They could be quite the roadblock when you want find a new location to build your stadium. Then they're also in a complicated relationship dynamic because they're so close to San Francisco that they can't choose locations like San Jose because it would conflict with the San Francisco Giants territory.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think would be the best outcome from this?
I would say that the owner of the Athletics ponies up and pays for his new stadium. One, so Athletics fans are not left without a team at all, and two, so the city isn't stuck paying for a stadium that they don't own.
Well, I will also say that this does have some similarities to the city of Seattle and how their
Yeah.
city council just constantly blocked uh, people at every turn when they wanted to get out of the former Key Arena, and they pretty
Mm-hmm.
much forced them to keep that arena and continue to make renovations to it due to the fact that the local city council kept blocking every potential land that could be used for a brand new arena.
Mm-hmm.
So I get that side of it as well, but if the if you can't come to a reasonable deal for both sides, then I think you're just going to end up seeing the A's in Las Vegas as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh yeah, now we need to go back to Joe Biden. Yesterday, he had a against speaking on the unemployment situation. So let's see if the video will work this time. So on Monday's show, I started to talk about what we could do for now in the general strike, especially with all the messages of fast food workers walking out on their places of work and seeing how they're struggling to hire people at these terrible wages. So, what are your thoughts of that message from Joe Biden that came out yesterday?
I thought that saying that people who choose to take their power into their own hands and saying that they can't do that and get the unemployment benefits that they are entitled to is just, it is the perfect representation of American neoliberalism.
In fact, I find that to be worse. I think I've said a lot that Joe Biden is pretty much the old establishment Republican, like your John McCain type, and that's pretty much a message of pick yourself up by the bootstraps, and
Yep.
him countering the workers using their leverage to force artificial wage increase.
Mm-hmm.
What are your Where do you think we stand currently on trying to get a general strike going?
Well, I'm hopeful that this wakes up American workers, specifically American minimum wage workers, to where they understand they no longer have to work or starve. They can use their power to get higher wages. But at the same time, when the President of the United States, along with members of his party, are saying either you work or you don't get your benefits, I can understand why people are not optimistic about a general strike or a mass strike.
On the show Monday, I was saying that this moment right now, if we can continue to boycott applying to these jobs, and it doesn't necessarily take a lot of people, and people don't necessarily have to quit in mass unless they've been broken by these jobs. But this right here is the road to a general strike. I don't think it's
Mm-hmm.
going to take a lot of people to force some wage increases and leverage the free market in favor of the workers.
Mm-hmm. I understand that point, but at the same time, about 9 years ago, this exact same argument was happening with the McDonald's fight for 15 under Obama, and we didn't even get to 10, let alone. Actually, I think we were arguing for $10 minimum wage, and we didn't even get that.
Yes, a week from today, there's supposed to be another McDonald's strike going on, and for now, the argument is the floor, which is $15.
Mm-hmm.
But after this year, seeing how that got rejected, we got to pull the Overton window even further left and start
Mm-hmm.
to make the ask higher, and that would be $25 an hour.
Which is where it would be if you track it towards productivity.
And now we go back to another famous liberal resistance celebrity, Alyssa Milano. So she had this tweet yesterday. It was pretty bad. So thanks to Bez the Socialist for snapshotting this one. So Alyssa quote tweets an article, levels of anxiety and depression are nearly quadruple 2019 levels. Here's how to counter that. And her response is vote. So how do you feel when the top resistant liberals like Alyssa Milano's response to everything is just vote?
Well, they're doing the meme for starters.
Yes, and it also brings me to a point that even though a lot of us on the left are down on the idea of electoralism, it's been a problem for a while where liberals have placed voting a few pedestals too high.
Mm-hmm.
And this recent group of the resistance brunch liberals have raised it up even quite a few more pedestals too high than it was initially.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, it's entirely unrealistic because it doesn't understand why um, people of color in marginalized communities are disenfranchised voters. They are disillusioned by the two-party system, and that 47 states have introduced 360 plus bills as of April to go against voting.
Yes,
That is
this is
94% of the country.
and this is the type of response that you get when the majority of the Republican Party still feels that the election was stolen from him. And when you see Joe Biden fail to meet even his standards that weren't good enough for a lot of the left to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
him failing to meet the moment is why Democrats stand to lose a lot in 2022.
They are setting themselves up for a massive failure. And I tried explaining this to someone that Joe Biden has reneged on like most of his policies. He didn't shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline. Kids are still in cages. The border, like, what else? We obviously talked about the $15 minimum wage thanks to the Senate parliamentarian and their lack of action against the Senate parliamentarian. Um, we haven't passed any healthcare reform. The Equality Act is stuck on the Senate floor and hasn't had any meaningful change since March. Uh, we like, and those are just the ones off the top of my head.
Then it's also hurts because the progressives in Congress had an opportunity to use their leverage and pull him in the right direction. But the people who are using their leverage most are people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. Those
Mm-hmm.
people are holding Joe Biden to the right.
Yep.
But even with that being said about how Republicans are setting up the field well to flip the House and Senate in 2022, you can't forget that if they continue to focus on the culture war, it's going to make it harder for them. And it may not be quite the runaway victory that even we would like to think it could be.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, it's definitely uh, everything feels like it's going against us right now.
Yeah.
So, Laryece, is there? I pretty much got through everything I had planned for today. Is there anything else you'd like to speak out about right now?
Not particularly. I think we covered everything pretty well and to the best of our knowledge.
Okay, so before we end this broadcast, is there anything that you'd like to plug and anything you plan to do in the future?
Um, if you can, donate or share to any Palestinian support causes, and just do your best to plaster that um, on social media, on YouTube, on Twitch, anywhere, just to make sure that the people in Palestine know that they are being heard.
Yes, it is very important that we try to help them in more ways than uh, just Twitter activism. So
Hmm.
you plugged a good cause right there. So don't forget to also plug your Twitter on the way out.
Yes, my Twitter account is at lridgeway14. I mainly tweet about politics.
And yes, it was great having you on the show today. So I look forward to having you on in the future. So have a good rest of your night, Laryece.
Same thing with you.
Well, that was Laryece Ridgeway, everyone. The second guest on today's episode 2 of the Rochford Files. So we got a lot of good stuff covered today. So I'll tell you that on Friday, my guest is supposed to be Jesse Gines, Texas leftist. So we will start to get into the gas shortages that are affecting the eastern side of the United States. Also plan to ask him his thoughts on the whole some stuff that passed in the Texas Senate. Among the couple things, in addition to, I expect more further Israel-Palestine fallout. Before we go, let's get my Patreon on the screen. So here it is right here, patreon.com/the Rochford Files. Here are my 3 tier levels: casual fan, bandwagoner, and diehard. As I said on Monday's show, still determining the type of benefits that we will offer since it's also a sports show. I'd like to have some sports related type benefits, such as access to a DraftKings or FanDuel type group, along with having a sports betting section on a future Discord channel. So I'm still looking to, I would hope to get some Patreon supporters soon. And also, don't forget to subscribe to the show, YouTube, The Rochford Files on YouTube, Twitch TV/The Rochford Files. And you can find me on Twitter at NugLifeComrade. So NUGG, then Life Comrade, along with the Rochford Files Twitter account, A Rochford Files. And we'll see y'all on Friday for the Rochford Files.